Thank you so much for the introduction, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me here to speak tonight. I'm truly honored, and it's sort of a funny situation to be on such a brightly lit stage, because part of what I want to talk with you about are some recordings that I've been conducting lately, which are often in underground and in extremely dark and damp spaces. So this initially began with a series of recordings that I was conducting in the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel, the world's first subway built in 1844 in Brooklyn, New York, working with urban explorer Bob Diamond and the Brooklyn Historic Rail Association. I've long been fascinated by trains, but part of what drew me to the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel was its historical significance, as well as the legend surrounding it, being a site for bootlegging and other variety of scandalous activities. But what was most surprising to me was the fact that the tunnel was almost forgotten after it was closed and sealed for nearly 100 years, until Bob Diamond rediscovered it in the early 1980s. This was astonishing to me. How does a city forget itself? After recording in this large tunnel over the course of several months, I was excited to learn that many of the structural elements that were based on aqueduct technology, and that those same principles had been used in service in the construction of the old Croton Aqueduct. After a little bit of research, I learned of the advocacy group, the Friends of the Old Croton Aqueduct, and in particular, I owe a great deal of thanks to the president, Mavis Kane, of that organization, as well as Vice President Bob Kornfeld, who've made a lot of my current sound projects in this space possible. So as you can tell, the Old Croton Aqueduct has since become a major fascination, and so part of what I hope to talk with you tonight is not only about an amazing and historically significant structure, but also how the process of creating sound works related to that structure has led to greater concerns about acoustical space, memory, and its relationship to technology. So just to give you a little bit of history on this, the Old Croton Aqueduct was built in 1842 and was the first constructed regular supply of fresh water for a thirsty New York City, which had previously been plagued by drunkenness, disease, and the unfortunate inability to extinguish its own fires. So the aqueduct extended over 40 miles and was gravity-fed, descending at approximately 13¼ inches per mile. The enthusiasm for this source of water was so great that the then-famed composer George P. Morris wrote the Croton Ode in celebration of the aqueduct's opening. The anticipation and hope could barely be contained in the lyrics. Gushing from this living fountain, music pours a falling strain. As the goddess of the mountain comes with sparkling train, water leaps as if delighted, while her conquered foes retire. Pale contagion flies affrighted with a baffled demon fire. Round the mists of aqueducts of story, as the mists of lately throng, Crotons wave in all their glory, troop in melody along. Ever sparkling, bright, and single, will this rock-ribbed stream appear, when posterity shall mingle, like the gathered waters here. From the lyrics, one can easily identify very practical solutions the aqueduct provided, with the pale contagion flying away, affrighted hand in hand with the demon fire. The aqueduct was so vital to the growth of New York City that its population immediately skyrocketed, prompting the construction of another entirely new aqueduct just 40 years later. The appropriately named New Croton Aqueduct ended up replacing the Old Croton Aqueduct, which was subsequently closed in the 1960s. Though water no longer gushes from this living fountain, I was still curious as to what it sounded like. What falling strains of sound still existed within this cavernous space? How does the space resonate, and how does it sonically interact with the world above it? Part of what is so enticing about these spaces is that they create a sense of discovery for those who find them, and have a unique sound world all their own. This was particularly the case when I, working along with Nestor Prieto, an outstanding graduate assistant, started recording in the ventilators that regularly aerated the water at roughly 1-mile intervals throughout the aqueduct. These ventilators look like little miniature towers, and they extend about 15 to 25 feet above ground. And you can imagine my excitement when we were able, with a telescoping ladder, best as seen on TV purchase ever, that we were able to get up to the top of those ventilators and then drop a microphone directly into the aqueduct and listen in. It was incredible. We were outside this elementary school in Ossining, and the rumble of the buses were pulling up, and they were punctuated by the shrieks and laughter of small children running around. And then what we heard underneath us was this gigantic cavern. The sounds of the outside world resonated inside this deep and hollow chamber, and occasionally a water droplet seeped in and added its own counterpoint to these reverberated sounds. The overlap of audience for this project was unplanned and has been surprising. When asked about sound in the space, enthusiasts of the space itself, as well of experimental music, have been intrigued. And I think this interest stems in part from the fact that the space is actually underground. When we say the word underground, it carries with it so many rich associations, political, historical, and cultural, in addition to geographical. These overlapping associations are elements that Brendan LaBelle comments on in his text, Acoustic Territories. Devoting an entire chapter to the concept of the underground and its sonic association, LaBelle theorizes what he calls the ontology of the echo. The echo, as he refers to it, performs an acoustic bomb, exploding the vector of time, of relations, of its origins for other perspectives. Exploding the vector of time, or at least complicating our relationship to it, is a fascinating prospect in these sonic relationships as we imagine an older version of our surroundings and ourselves, one that is difficult to construct without anachronism, but nonetheless allows us to examine something beyond and yet intersect with the immediate present. And this is because when one enters the aqueduct and listens to one gentle droplet fall and resonate within that tunnel, it is impossible to do so without a sense of humility towards the hands and tools that physically dug out that resonating infrastructure. The associations refracted by sound excite both our understandings and imaginings of the past, present, and future. When I think of some of the experimental compositions that have changed my life, such as Alvin Lucier's landmark piece, I'm Sitting in a Room, I realized that many of them revealed some sort of hidden magic about a space that you thought you might already know, but that then suddenly becomes opened up to new discovery by being directly experienced and investigated through sound. Listening in this way connects these different temporal associations and conjures up some of the differences between hearing and listening. In drawing on the distinction between hearing and listening, composer, performer, and live electronics pioneer Paula Alvarez specifically focuses on the agency involved in careful and deliberate observation of sound, applying this distinction to the practice she calls deep listening. As she states, deep listening is listening to everything all the time and reminding yourself when you're not, but going below the surface too. It's an active process. The idea of going below the surface, of hearing to listening deeply, emphasizes oral awareness as a critical element for exploration. In working with the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel and the Old Croton Aqueduct, it wasn't just the history I found attractive, but also that I was seeking a musical process that was deliberately physical and slow. As an avid fan and practitioner of electronic music, I want to make an argument in our increasingly precise and digitized world for that which is often contradictory to it, that is, slowness and imperfection. Now, I'm not advocating that we all go out, find a manhole to some sewer, and crawl inside. In fact, please don't do that, or at least not all at once. But what is important to recognize here is that imperfection and very gradual sonic processes, as they relate to space, can be powerful. In thinking about how sounds in the aqueduct, part of what is exciting to imagine is how sound reverberates in that space. Though truthfully, anyone could simulate that by adding a plug-in or using some sort of reverb unit with a sound processing program. What is interesting about actually going to the physical space, such as an aqueduct, is that it is imperfect, and that investigating what is possible with it sonically is an incredibly slow process. There is such delight in this. The time it takes is longer, but it forges a meaningful connection with one's surroundings. And part of this is a resistance to forgetting. These spaces are still around us, and when we engage with them sonically, they come alive. The infrastructures of our cities have revealed themselves to be increasingly vulnerable, particularly in the wake of epic storms and what now seems like the annual snowpocalypse. So, returning to the Old Croton Ode, I particularly like the lyrics, "Round the aqueducts of story, as the mists of Lethe throng, Croton's waves in all their glory, troop in melody along." What I like about this ode is the fact that someone wrote a piece of music for an aqueduct over 150 years ago. But also, I like that the aqueducts of story battle forgetfulness, those mists of Lethe, those through waves trooping along in melody. Closing the eyes, navigating a darkened space through sound causes us to draw on our other imaginative faculties to interpret what we encounter. This is why I'm curious about sound specifically in remembered spaces. The space prefigures our acoustical present, while exciting our imaginings of the cultural past. When I play the recordings of sounds from the aqueduct, I'm often struck by the variety of visceral responses I receive from listeners. Some people are surprised by the depth, and occasionally claim to hear ghosts. I'm not opposed to these interpretations, though I can't claim to have yet encountered any supernatural activity. Moreover, I am glad that some connection is made, and that some memory, regardless of how fleeting, divergent, or mutable, is excited. These sounds and their echoes not only explode the vector of time, but also, as LaBelle states, of relations and origins for other perspectives. Sound, space, and memory interweave fluidly with unpredictable results. In a moment of active listening, we get to hear our spaces as well as our histories differently. Though our cities are prone to forgetfulness, we can for a moment enact the hope sung in the old Croton Ode. Ever sparkling, bright, and single will this rock-ribbed stream appear when posterity shall mingle like the gathered waters here.